Hey, and welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Got a lot to get to this hour. A little bit later on in the hour, we'll give you the update on Brexit, which is really getting intense over there. It looks like a snap election may be in the works over in Britain. But we bring you first the latest on the American 2020 election. There is a new poll out from IBD-TIPP, and it shows that Joe Biden remains the Democratic frontrunner, according to IBD. But Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is now within 4 points of the former VP in September's IBD-TIPP poll. Now, again, the polls are a little bit all over the place when it comes to election 2020 and the primaries. So there's this Economist YouGov poll, and that one shows Biden up just 4 at 26 to 22 over Elizabeth Warren. But the same morning, you have one coming out from Politico Morning Consult that shows Biden up 32 to 20 over Bernie Sanders and Warren down at 16. And then you got the IBD-TIPP poll, which has Biden up just 4. The Economist and IBD-TIPP have been tracking each other lately. All the other polls tend to show this much wider gap. Who do you believe? Well, I will say that IBD and TIPP were the best polling source during the 2016 election, which is bad news for Joe Biden. According to Investors Business Daily, Biden remains the surest choice in the 2020 election versus President Trump, with a 12-point advantage in a head-to-head matchup. Warren, however, only has a narrow 3-point edge, which means that Trump is in pretty good shape against Elizabeth Warren, because remember, Elizabeth Warren hadn't run a campaign yet. Elizabeth Warren is really getting the boffo burnishing treatment from the media. I mean, they are out there buffing and shining her like Mr. Miyagi. It's incredible. I mean, they are out there to make Elizabeth Warren seem absolutely wonderful. And as we covered on yesterday's show, she's basically now a down-the-line, progressive Bernie Sanders type when she used to actually be kind of interesting. So according to that IBD-TIPP poll, Joe Biden's support is down from 30 to 28. Elizabeth Warren rose 7 points from 17 in August to 24 in September. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders unchanged from August at 12, and Kamala Harris continues to sink all the way down to 6%. Buttigieg stuck at 5 despite all the media attention. Cory Booker is up to 4%, and he brought his angry eyes. No other candidate polls more than 1%. In a head-to-head 2020 election contest, Biden versus Trump, the IBD-TIPP poll finds a 54 to 42 advantage for Biden. That's pretty consistent. A month earlier, Biden was up on Trump by about 13 points. However, when it looks at Sanders and Warren and Harris, then it's much narrower. Sanders in this poll had a narrow 49-45 edge over Trump. Warren and Harris were at 49 to 46 over Trump. Now, among independents, Biden just skunks Trump in this poll. Among independents, Biden is up on Trump 55 to 37. Among independents, Warren only edges Trump by 2%, and that is unlikely to continue as people see more of Elizabeth Warren. She ages well in a Democratic primary. I do not know that she ages well in a general election, specifically because her economic plans are bat bleep loony. I mean, her economic plans are fully crazy. She's talking about basically paying off everybody's college tuition. She's talking about a Green New Deal. She's talking about universal pre-K. She's talking about spending upon spending upon spending, and her proposal is an unconstitutional wealth tax to fund all of that, which is never going to pass or happen. Warren is in the lead among whites and liberals. Again, Biden's support base remains among minorities. Biden is at 28% support among both women and men. Warren is now running at 27% among women, so she's tying with Biden, but she's only at 19% among men. Among white voters, Warren is the favorite. So Warren, just like Bernie Sanders, was earning disproportionate white support, so is Elizabeth Warren. She's got 26% support to Biden's 24 and 14% for Sanders. Now, the bad news for Biden is that the first two states are super white. Iowa and New Hampshire are super duper white. But polling by IBD shows that Warren is trailing both Biden and Sanders in New Hampshire still. So she really does need to win Iowa. Among self-described liberals, she is now up 35 to 18 for Biden and 14 for Sanders. But among blacks, Hispanics, and older voters, Biden dominates. He has 33% support to 19 for Warren and 10% for Bernie. Support for Biden is tepid among younger voters. So this spells, I think, victory for Elizabeth Warren in Iowa. Can she carry that forward all the way through New Hampshire? She's polling surprisingly not strong in a state that neighbors her own. So it may actually be bad news for Democrats that Elizabeth Warren is running strong in the primaries. If she wins the nomination, she's less likely to beat Trump by leaps and bounds than Joe Biden is. Now, meanwhile, some bad news for President Trump on the economic front. Obviously, if the economy were to take a dive or seriously slow before the election, that is a major problem for President Trump, which is one of the reasons why the Trump campaign is so suspicious that many folks on the left are talking down the economy in advance of the election, obviously. Now, Trump has been calling on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates again to sort of jog economic growth. But the Fed is reluctant to do that, I think rightly so, because they don't want to spur inflation. The Boston Fed president, Eric Rosengren, basically announced that he'd vote against a rate cut earlier on Tuesday. According to Heather Long reporting for the Washington Post, shortly after President Trump fired off a tweet on Tuesday urging the Federal Reserve to boost the economy by slashing interest rates, Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren said cutting rates now would be a mistake. Top Fed officials, including Rosengren, will meet September 18th to determine if interest rates should decline or stay the same. Now, Trump has been making the simultaneous and nonsensical argument that the fundamentals of the economy are strong, but we do need to lower the interest rates in order to what? Spur the economy ahead of the election? Trump has tweeted some 34 times in the past month demanding that the Fed lower the funds rate by a significant amount as recession fears have risen. Fed officials remain divided on whether even a modest cut is warranted. Rosengren said, "This isn't a free lunch. There are costs to accommodating at a time when the economy is doing reasonably well." In other words, the Fed really only has one tool available for when the economy goes bad, and that is to lower interest rates. And when people aren't spending enough, the Fed lowers the interest rates. When the economy slows, the Fed lowers the interest rates. The Fed tries to pump up the economy with a little bit of inflation. Right? That is the goal of the Fed. Well, if you take away that tool, if the interest rates are already at zero and then recession hits, where exactly do you go from there? You end up in a position very often, as Europe is showing, where you end up with negative interest rates. We're basically paying people to borrow. Rosengren says the U.S. economy is in a relatively strong place with low unemployment, rising wages, and a solid growth driven by consumer spending. He said he doesn't see the need for lower interest rates until there are clearer signs of distress from the trade war on consumers. If the Fed were to lower rates too soon, he's worried that they wouldn't have any firepower left to fight the bigger problems later on. And this is indeed the problem. You know, we've had on this program Mohamed El-Erian, the head of Allianz, and he has stated, and I think quite rightly, that policymakers are now too dependent on central banks. Now, Rand Paul has long stated that the Fed is a political organ, and that we should audit the Fed to see exactly what savings the Fed holds, to see exactly how the Fed works. That's true. The Fed is basically unanswerable. With that said, the Fed was always seen as sort of the policymaker of last resort. Now it's the policymaker of first resort. People who are in the stock market sit around waiting to read the tea leaves from random individuals who are members of the Fed. The benchmark U.S. interest rate is just shy of 2.25%, which is indeed a low level by historical standards. Trump wants it at 1.25%. He tweeted on Tuesday, "Germany and so many other countries have negative interest rates. They get paid for loaning money. Our Federal Reserve fails to act. Remember, these are also our weak currency competitors." Well, inflating the currency doesn't make your economy stronger, dude. Inflating the currency is usually a sign of economic weakness. Now, maybe you want to weaken the American currency to make our products more competitive on foreign markets. Is that the idea here? Make it more expensive to import products from foreign markets? But that really hurts domestic consumers and hurts those who have had the wherewithal to save money. Trump wants the stock market to climb. In August, the president tweeted repeated insults at Fed Chair Jerome H. Powell, calling Powell an enemy, a golfer who can't putt, and someone with horrendous lack of vision. Experts are divided on whether the nation is likely to slip into a downturn by 2021. The manufacturing sector is already in a recession. Business spending is drying up amid the trade war, and the bond market is signaling trouble ahead, but stocks remain near record highs, and companies are continuing to hire, and consumers are still spending. So a lot of this trepidation is driven by China. It's driven by the EU. But in America, we have a very large consumer market. There are not a lot of signs that the American economy is about to plunge into a recession, maybe a mild slowdown. Okay, so President Trump is trying to make a pitch for re-election, and that pitch does depend in some part on keeping his biggest promise, which is to build that wall. Paul Sun and Seung-Min Kim reporting for the Washington Post. The Pentagon has now approved a diversion of military construction funds for the Trump wall. Defense Secretary Mark Esper agreed on Tuesday to free up $3.6 billion from the Pentagon budget for President Trump's border wall by effectively defunding 127 military construction projects using emergency authorities. Now, there is statutory authority to do this. We talked about this back when Trump was talking about declaring a national emergency. I pointed out he doesn't actually have to do this. There are already provisions of American law that allow him to redirect to shoring up existing wall and building new wall. Esper determined that the use of military construction funds was necessary to support American forces deployed to the southern border with Mexico under the national emergency that Trump declared in mid-February. The formal determination allows Trump, under an obscure statute in the federal code overseeing the military, to tap the funds appropriated for other purposes without any sign-off from Congress. Again, I think that case is a little bit legally dicey, given the fact that Congress did sound off and say they deliberately do not want that money spent on the border. But Defense Secretary going to move forward with it anyway. The Pentagon declined to disclose which projects would be defunded because they don't want that used as a weapon, presumably against the Defense Department and President Trump. During a briefing on Tuesday, top Pentagon officials said that the $3.6 billion will fund 11 projects, providing 175 miles of new or reconstructed wall along the border with Mexico and help reduce the need for American troops deployed there. Now, there is that, provision there that says new or reconstructed wall. That should make people a little bit nervous. You need new wall, not just reconstructed. Barriers will be reinforced or replaced with bigger walls in some places. Some stretches of wall will be built in other locations. They're going to build a wall along the U.S. military's Barry Goldwater bombing range in Arizona, which abuts the border with Mexico, according to officials. The spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security said that the funding will go to adding significantly new capabilities to DHS's ability to prevent illegal entry. In areas where we go from, say, a vehicle barrier to a 30-foot wall, we have a significantly new set of capabilities that didn't exist previously. About half of the $3.6 billion will come from projects within the United States and its territories. The other half will come from projects the U.S. military was planning in foreign countries. The Pentagon says the projects aren't being canceled, and they won't be delayed so long as Congress backfills the funds and, again, appropriates the money to them. And this is where Congress makes the case, guys, we appropriated the funds for those other projects, not for the wall. Why would we fill in the gap now? The answer is you should have filled in the gap before. The truth is that there was a deal on the table a couple of years ago that basically would have traded the wall for the gradual legalization of many of the Dreamers. It was a fairly good deal, and Trump sunk it at the last moment. That was a mistake. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, of course, is mad. She says the administration's irresponsible decision to transfer funds from appropriated U.S. military construction makes America feel less safe and dishonors the Constitution. Well, I'm pretty sure that the wall makes us feel a little more safe, actually. She says the president is negating the Constitution's most fundamental principle, the separation of powers. Ah, yes, I remember when Nancy Pelosi was deeply upset by Barack Obama unilaterally declaring he no longer had to enforce immigration law. One of the great joys of watching the political discourse is watching people who cared about checks and balances 5 minutes ago no longer care about it now, and vice versa. It's really wonderful to watch. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island is a ranking Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He said that future presidents would try to tap money for their own desired initiatives through emergency declarations, which, of course, is probably true, which is why I was not in favor of the national emergency declaration in the first place. There are other provisions that do allow Trump some authority to do this sort of stuff. With that said, Trump is obviously trying to fulfill this promise in advance of the election. And maybe he gets it done. If he does, that is certainly a point in his political favor, even if I disagree with how he goes about doing it. So things are getting hot and heavy over in Britain over Brexit. So as you recall, last we checked, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, he had made a move just a week ago to prorogue Parliament, which basically suspends them a little bit early, like 5 days early. And the idea was to prevent people from coalescing around a plan to stop Brexit. He wanted a no-deal Brexit to go forward on October 31st or some sort of deal to be cut quickly. Well, now Parliament is pushing back. According to the New York Times, British lawmakers on Tuesday rose up against Prime Minister Johnson, moving to prevent him from taking the country out of the EU without a formal agreement. The epic showdown pushed Britain to the verge of a new election. After losing his first ever vote as Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson stood up in Parliament and said he intended to present a formal request for a snap general election to lawmakers who would have to approve it. So he's saying, listen, you don't want to make a deal with me over Brexit? I have a solution for you. We'll have a new election, and we'll see how that goes for you. A little over a month ago, Johnson swept into office with a vow to finally wrest Britain from the European Union by whatever means necessary, even if it meant a disorderly no-deal departure. Now, Parliament has pulled the rug out from under him. Johnson is at risk of falling into the same Brexit quagmire that dragged down Theresa May, his predecessor. The lawmakers forced his hand by voting 328 to 301 to take control of Parliament away from the government and vote on legislation as soon as Wednesday that would block the Prime Minister from making good on his threat of a no-deal Brexit. Johnson said, I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. But if the House votes for this bill tomorrow, the public will have to choose who goes to Brussels on October 17th to sort this out and take this country forward. He's referring to the next EU summit. Tuesday was a critical moment, says the New York Times, in Britain's tortured 3-year effort to extract itself from the European Union. The saga has divided Britons, torn apart the ruling Conservative Party, and prompted complaints that Johnson has trampled the conventions of the country's unwritten constitution. Of course, that's not true. Many prime ministers have prorogued Parliament before. A majority of lawmakers are determined to block a withdrawal from the EU without a deal. They believe that would be disastrous for the country's economy. Tuesday's vote suggested they have the numbers to succeed. Johnson's aides made it clear that in the event of a defeat on Tuesday, he would seek a general election on October 14th, just a little over 2 weeks before the Brexit deadline of October 31st. Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader, said he would agree to an election only after Parliament passed legislation barring a no-deal Brexit altogether. The House of Commons was expected to approve the measure on Wednesday, so the deal is that he would trade the Conservative Party a new election in exchange for legislation barring a no-deal Brexit. On a day of high drama, Johnson lost his working majority in Parliament even before the vote took place. One conservative rebel, Philip Lee, quit the party and joined the Liberal Democrats, who have managed to stage a resurgence by positioning themselves as an unambiguously anti-Brexit party. The practical effect was limited because the government only falls if there's a no-confidence motion. But in a moment weighty with symbolism, Lee walked across the floor of the House of Commons and sat beside Joe Swinson, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, as the Prime Minister was speaking about the recent Group of Seven summit. Lee accused Johnson of pursuing a damaging withdrawal from the EU in unprincipled ways and putting lives and livelihoods at risk. On Tuesday night, Downing Street began pressing ahead with plans to discipline the rebels within the party who voted against the government, moving to expel them from the Conservative Party. That includes 2 former chancellors of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond and Kenneth Clarke, and Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill. That could threaten Johnson's ability to manage day-to-day business in Parliament, which would underscore the need for a new election. And Johnson wants the new election because he understands that if he runs as an unambiguously pro-Brexit prime minister, he will win the vast majority of conservative votes, and he'll pick up all of the Brexit party votes as well. So people are portraying this as though Johnson lost. Listen, I think Johnson knew this was coming, and that is why he's calling for a snap election. He's saying, okay, you really want to make Jeremy Corbyn the prime minister of Great Britain? This old commie anti-Semite, that's the guy you want to be prime minister of Great Britain? And he has been ripping incessantly on Jeremy Corbyn. He appealed to his own lawmakers not to support what he called Jeremy Corbyn's surrender bill. He says it means running up a white flag. Also, Johnson claimed that he was making progress with the EU leaders. Britain's main demand is that the EU ditch the so-called Irish backstop, which was a guarantee that the bloc insisted they needed to ensure that goods flow smoothly across the Irish border, whatever happens in trade negotiations with Britain. And the big problem is that part of the island of Ireland would prefer to remain in the EU, part would not. And if Britain exits the EU, well then, how exactly are goods going to be traded over the border within Ireland? Conservative rebels believe Johnson is more interested in uniting Brexit supporters behind him ahead of a general election than in securing an agreement in Brussels, which is probably true. But so what? The British voted in the biggest referendum in their history for Brexit. The politicians don't want to give them Brexit, and they would prefer no deal, no Brexit to no deal Brexit. That is as simple as it gets. And so Johnson is saying, fine, let's make this official. Let's do a snap election, and then we'll find out once and for all whether I have a working majority to finally press through a Brexit deal or not. Because right now, he's basically been handed a mandate with not enough people to back his mandate. So that is the latest on Brexit. People are portraying this as though Johnson was outplayed. I really, really doubt that. I have a significant feeling that Prime Minister Johnson sort of knew that this was coming and was working along these lines all along because, after all, he was sort of shoehorned into this position. Wouldn't it be nicer to remain prime minister with a broad majority? Well, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, so fresh, so face. I mean, endless amounts of both freshness and faceness and face freshness and all that. She got very upset with Dan Crenshaw. Why? Well, our friend, the congressperson from Texas, he tweeted out that there's a story that he tweeted about in which a woman was trying to defend herself and against 5 men. She had a handgun and she fired at them and one suspect was shot and she is fine. So Dan Crenshaw tweeted out, situations like this story are why we protect the Second Amendment. Side note, with universal background checks, I wouldn't be able to let my friends borrow my handgun when they travel alone like this. We would make felons out of people just for defending themselves. Meaning, let's say I have a female friend who is traveling to an unsafe area, and I trust her with a gun. I could give her the gun under normal law. Well, you create universal background checks, and now I would have to put her through some sort of background check. AOC, not understanding how English works, she tweeted out, "You are a member of Congress. Why are you lending guns to people unsupervised who can't pass a basic background check? Okay, that's not what he said. He literally did not say that. He said that he might have to lend a gun to someone who does not have one, but probably could pass a background check, I would assume, if they're friends with Dan Crenshaw, that he would lend them a gun on short notice to do things. She says, the people you're giving a gun to have likely abused their spouse or have a violent criminal record, and you may not know it. Why on earth would you do that? Because he wouldn't, and you're stupid, is the answer. Because AOC is a stupid human with stupid ideas and a brain that does not work properly. Dan Crenshaw tweeted back, just so I'm clear, you think my friends are domestic abusers / criminals? Seriously? That's your argument? That they can't pass a background check? Wrong. People lend guns to friends, especially if they don't own a gun, for self-defense and hunting purposes. This is America outside New York City. My friend Noah Rothman over at Commentary Magazine, who is certainly not, I would say, a big hunting dude from Arkansas or anything. He says, I've only lived in Sapphire Blue, New Jersey. When you have to put down a varmint that's eating neighborhood pets, you borrow your neighbor's 22 to do it. This isn't even real America bravado. It's just life. It is obvious, by the way, that she does not understand her own law. Liz Mayer tweeted out, are you seriously saying you want every American to have access to background check systems just in case they want to lend a gun to their sibling and not be held liable should something bad happen? That is a civil liberties disaster waiting to happen. Well, yes, but AOC's ideas are usually a disaster waiting to happen or just a disaster that has already happened. All right, time to take some of your phone calls at 855-236-3228. It's time for a phone frenzy, so let's do this thing. Mike in New York, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Mike.
Hey, Ben, how you doing?
Hey, doing well. Go for it, sir.
Good, yeah. I know you mentioned this before, but also as far as the Michelle Obama coming into the election, I mean, the Obamas are very, very quiet going forward. Do you think? I mean, is it a possibility at all?
Yeah, Mike. I think
like when she jumps in.
You know, I think it's deeply unlikely that Michelle Obama jumps into the race. There's every election cycle. There's talk about somebody bigfooting and jumping into the race late. In the last election cycle, there was a lot of talk about some other figure. There was talk about Michelle last time, actually, in 2016 when Hillary was kind of lackluster. There was talk in 2012 about Hillary Clinton jumping in if Barack Obama started to fade. So there's always talk about various Democrats jumping in. I don't get the impression that Michelle Obama wants in right now, especially because the risk of losing to Donald Trump. I mean, can you imagine how that would ruin the Obama family if Michelle Obama were to run against Donald Trump and somehow lose? Now, listen, would she be a dangerous candidate? Absolutely. I mean, this is a woman who just sold, I think, 10 million copies of her book. I can pat myself on the back when I say that mine was the first nonfiction book to knock her off the top of the New York Times bestseller list for something like a year. But the fact is that she is a formidable political figure if she chooses to do something, but she's not jumping in right now, much to the Democrats' chagrin. Mike, thanks so much for the call. Annie in Arkansas, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Annie.
Hi, Ben. So my question is, so why does the left propose to stand for equality between ethnic groups when they target Asians through their own policies, like the SAT adversity score? And doesn't this like countervail against their agenda, which is that America is a racist country and they are not racist?
This is 100%, Annie. I mean, the reason why Asians are not considered a minority in the United States anymore is because Asians are disproportionately well-educated and successful. For the same reason that Jews used to be considered a minority, and then Jews were well-educated and successful and were no longer considered a minority. In fact, the left's perspective on racial minorities is that they now get to be considered part of the majority based on their level of success, which of course is deeply derogatory toward many minority groups. I mean, to be judged based on your membership in a minority group, not on your status as an individual or your performance as an individual, and to deride various minority groups or disadvantage various minority groups because they have achieved too much is bizarre. I mean, we saw this at Harvard University, where Harvard has been systematically discriminating against against Asian students. I mean, Asians, again, have a long history of being discriminated against in the United States. And the fact that Asians are treated as a non-minority group is just evidence that for the left, this is really more about a Marxist attempt to level all outcomes rather than deep care and concern for minority groups in general. Because as soon as a minority group does well, they're no longer considered a minority group. Now they're part of the white privileged class, I suppose. Annie, thanks so much for the call. Ben, calling all the way from Israel. So you must be listening online, I assume. Ben, thanks so much for joining the show. Go for it, sir.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. This is a great moment. I just wanted to know, I know you always talk about the difference between someone who's born Jewish, someone who's does the Jewish religion, and the same assuming is by all religions. I was just wondering, like, well, I'm an Israelite. There's plenty of Jewish voices here who keep like some of the commandments, some keep something more than others. What would you consider like a Jewish person, someone to follow for your Jewish beliefs?
So, Benton, this is a great question. Obviously, there are gradations in terms of Jewish practice. I think a lot of people ask this question because I make a very hard distinction between what I call ethnic Judaism and religious Judaism, or philosophical Judaism, or even identification as a Jew. I think that it is easier to do it the other way. People who consider themselves only ethnic Jews are people who are atheists, people who deride Judaism, people who believe that Judaism is myth-making or a fairy tale. It's fair to say that those people were just born into a Jewish family. Now, among other Jews, there are people who deride Judaism to a certain extent, pretend that it is old-fashioned, but they still consider themselves culturally Jewish. I don't care much about cultural Judaism, meaning I eat matzo balls and I like Fiddler on the Roof. That doesn't make any difference to me. As far as religious practice, if you're trying to do anything, then my feeling is that you are at least operating within the realm of religious Judaism. Now, obviously, there are levels of that. I mean, levels going all the way up to Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is generally defined by you keep Shabbat and you keep kosher. But my entire extended family is obviously, kind of culturally Jewish more than religiously Jewish, but at least they identify as Jewish and see a certain solidarity in Judaic religion and practice. So I guess that, I sort of define everybody religious, non-religious, politically, non-politically, in the way that my father did. My father always taught us that in life, it's not about where you stand, it's about which direction you're moving. If you're moving in the direction of more religious practice or more religious philosophy, then I think it's fair to consider you part of that circle. If you're moving away, then I think that it's unfair to consider you part of that circle. Ben, I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Ted in Long Island, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Ted.
Hey, Ben, how are you? I'm a new listener, and I really love the show. I wanted to speak to you about the trade/Cold War with China and your opinion on it.
Sure, go for it. So, I mean, I think, do you have a specific question on it?
Yes. Well, I see China stealing intellectual property, supporting North Korea, threatening India with no historical claim, and I don't see the left calling anything out on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think, Ted, that it is a mistake to treat what is going on with China as a mere trade war. And this has been my criticism of President Trump on the trade war, is he put it in context. Like, I think he should have done a full address. I think there should have been an attempt to put in context what the trade war represents. What exactly are our interests vis-a-vis China? What exactly are we attempting to do against China? Is this part of a broader geopolitical strategy, or is this just that Trump is mad about the trade deficit and is slapping tariffs on China in order to fight it? Because from an economic perspective, that doesn't make a lot of sense. A tariff war doesn't make sense. A tariff that is placed on an unfriendly government as part of a broader Cold War, that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, that's effectively what the United States did with the USSR for years. This is why I've been calling on President Trump to contextualize what exactly he's doing here. And I think that would be totally appropriate, by the way. I think that if we were to have a harsh China policy, just in general, and the trade war were part of that policy, that makes a lot more sense than just, we're mad at China, don't like the trade deficit, here's a tariff.
Agreed.
Well, I really appreciate it, Ted. Thanks so much for the call. Nicholas calling from Pittsburgh. You're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Nicholas.
Hi, Ben. How you doing?
Doing well. Go for it, sir.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, what as a common man with no real platform, what can I do to come up against Walmart and their ridiculous policy? As somebody who just wants to be able to buy ammo and their coffee and clothes all in the same place, what can I do, or what can the common man do to combat this ridiculous new policy that they have with the ammo?
I mean, I think first of all, we do have to make our voices heard to the Walmart executives. I think that the left has extraordinarily loud voices that are out there in the media basically proclaiming that if Walmart doesn't do their bidding, then they are going to do something to Walmart's bottom line. They're going to shame them publicly. They're going to go after them. I think that, unfortunately, the only way to stop this is mutually assured destruction, meaning I think that you need to call up your local Walmart and register a complaint. You need to maybe start looking at other places to shop. In the long run, that is what's going to happen. I think the conservatives are going to be forced to look to alternative methods of distribution because they can't simply allow corporations to operate along the lines the left wants them to operate and then still give them their profit. If only one side is playing that game, then that side is going to win. And right now, only one side is playing that game. I would prefer no sides play this game. I think the game is stupid, right? I feel sort of like the Whopper at the end of War Games. The only winning solution here is not to play. But at the same time, if the left is going to play this game where they try to hijack corporations into doing their bidding, the right has no other real available response other than to make clear to Walmart that we'll take our shopping elsewhere. And there are a lot of us. I mean, I think that if they understand that they're going to see a dent in their bottom line, and we say this on Twitter and we say this on Facebook, they have people monitoring social media. They have to know, other companies have to know that if they decide to take sides with the left, that they are taking sides against an entire group of people. Nicholas, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for your call. Chris in Charlotte, North Carolina, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, Chris.
Hey, Ben, do you think that Dave Chappelle might be just the right guy at just the right time to stand up to this politically correct nonsense, given that he's already proven that he really doesn't care that much about his career? He took that hiatus for however long he did, and he's already got $50 million in the bank or whatever, so maybe he's just the guy to bust this thing up.
Yeah, no, I'm really hoping that's right, Chris. I think that you're seeing this from a lot of comedians. As I've been saying over the past couple of days, I think that the world of comedy is going to be the first that runs up against the restraints and the strictures of the nasty Wokescold left. And you're seeing this with Chappelle and even people who are very liberal. Aziz Ansari, he has a special on Netflix. Most of the special is dedicated to how annoying Wokescolds are. You know, the left is beginning to wake. Sarah Silverman, who's as far left as it's possible to be, is annoyed by the Wokescold censorship and policing. So I think that the comedic world is going to be the first to recognize that the humorless world of Hannah Gadsby is actually a terrible place to live. And Chappelle might be an important figure in that. In fact, I think the left realizes he's an important figure in that. And that's why a lot of the critics are going after him so hard right now for having violated their sense of propriety. Chris, thanks so much for the call. Let's see. Moses in New Jersey, you're on the Ben Shapiro Show. Go for it, sir.
Hey, how you doing, Ben? Thank you so much for taking my call, my friend.
Absolutely.
So basically, the one thing that I've gotten from just a back and forth and how Republicans and Democrats debate is that Democrats cannot actually defend their positions. They cannot debate. So what needs to happen, I believe, is that they need to be forced into debate against people they will not be able to win against. So a perfect example, and my question is, why isn't the Republicans and also the president, what he should be doing is allowing the people that are actually briefing him in regards to crime, in regards to immigration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a former Marine myself and former Homeland Security employee.
Well, thank you,
Why
sir.
is the president not seizing this opportunity to allow his platform to be shared? Let's say, for example, a live town hall.
Moses, it's such a great
allowing the
question.
men and women that are on that border to actually brief the American people and give the briefing to the American people that the president essentially gets and force the Democrats to defend their positions.
Yeah, Moses, first of all, thank you for everything that you've done for the country. Second of all, I totally agree with this. And I wish that the president didn't have an ego problem and were willing to delegate the task of communicating to the people who are communicating to him. I think the president, unfortunately, doesn't very much like when other people are on magazine covers or getting a lot of camera time. But the fact is that he has a lot of people working for him who are better communicators than he is. And it seems like common sense to do exactly what you're talking about. Why not have border agents talking about the situation on the border? Why not have police officers talking about the situation with crime in our inner cities? Right? That seems like a perfectly good idea. I'd love to see the president take you up on that. So say that you decided that you were going to go shooting with a parent or a relative, and you decided to post a picture on one of your social media profiles. Would you expect that your school would then suspend you? Well, this is exactly what happened to Nate Myers. His mom is Justine Myers. Both of them join us on the line right now. Nate is a junior at Loveland High School in Loveland, Colorado. Nate and Justine, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So, Nate, why don't you tell me what exactly happened here? Apparently, you posted a couple of photos of the guns that you were shooting after a fun day at the gun range on Snapchat, and then things started to go wrong.
Yeah, so on Tuesday, I got pulled out of school, and me and my mom were going to go shooting up at the range, I believe in Red Feather. And so we get to her house, we're pulling out all the guns, setting them on the table, and I snapped a picture of them for Snapchat. None of them were loaded, they were all in their cases. And I put the caption, "Finna be lit," which means gonna be fun. And then we went to the range. The place we went didn't have any service when we were shooting. So on our way back, we got service for a second, and my dad was blowing up my mom's phone, saying there was a cop at my house looking for me. And then my dad told us that he talked to the cop, explained to him that we were at the range, and then the cop that night deemed me not a threat. So I went home, went to bed, woke up the next morning, got ready for school, and as I'm walking out the door, my dad goes, "Hey, hold up, wait a minute. Listen to this." So, and then he had a voicemail from the district that said, "Your son, Nathan Myers, will not be allowed to attend Loveland High until further notice, until threat assessment is complete." So that's kind of what made us a little upset and confused. My mom then tried contacting the school to get my missing work and find out further information, and they denied both of those. And then my mom went onto some NRA groups and Pro 2A groups, and it kind of blew up. And then the school found out about it, and they scheduled the hearing for the next morning at 10 in the morning. So we went to that. I guess it was supposed to last an hour, but it only lasted 5 minutes. They kind of rushed us out of there. Like, we got in there. He gave me the work, went in, sat down, and they told it, oh, yeah, we never thought he was a threat. We never thought this. And then they claimed that they didn't know about it until 20 hours after.
So, Justine, I want to ask you about your family's relationship with guns and your sort of Second Amendment stance. So how old was Nate when you started shooting with him?
He was probably about 8 or 9.
And what kind of guns do you own in the house? And how often do you go shooting?
We have an array of pistols, revolvers, rifles, kind of a lot. We go shooting as often as we can. We own a business, so our time is kind of limited, which is why I pulled him out of school that day. He works and I work, 90 hours a week at my business. So it kind of just was the perfect storm just to be like, okay, let's go now. Let's go shooting up there today.
So, Justine, what's the fallout been for your family, for your son, from all of this? Because obviously it was precipitous. People reacted in real time. Do you feel like the school handled this properly, or how could they better handle this in the future?
I feel like the school, they reacted to the Safe to Tell tip, which as a parent, I'm grateful that they did that, and I understand why they had to do so. But when the police officer had cleared him Tuesday night, it should have been squashed on Tuesday night. We should have never gotten to this point.
Well, Nate and Justine, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on and telling your story. Obviously, listen, we all want schools to be cautious. We all want people to be notified if they think that there is a risk. But as you say, once the police have sounded off on something, to have the school continue to deny any sort of legal access to even going to school for your son is pretty absurd. Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, in other law and order news, Jussie Smollett, as Dave Chappelle describes him, Jussie Smollett, is now angry at the Chicago PD. Why? Because they spent a lot of money to find his attackers. So he claimed that he was attacked by 2 white guys in red hats in the middle of the Chicago streets at 2 a.m. in the middle of a polar vortex. And the police took that seriously and investigated it. And now he's mad that they spent too much money trying to find out who did it, which is exactly what a person who is actually victimized in a crime would say. I know if I were victimized in a crime and then the police spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to find the person who did it, I'd be like, how dare they spend so much money and time trying to find out who victimized me? Or alternatively, maybe only a criminal says that, because it's the criminal who's on the other end of the investigation. Apparently, Smollett's latest court filing pins the decision to spend so much money on the police probe squarely on law enforcement. All their fault, guys. Well done, everybody. Alrighty, coming up, we are going to be talking about the left's gun control push, which is becoming more and more extreme. We're going to be talking about how that gun control push isn't just aimed at legislators anymore. Now they are aiming directly at corporations, and corporations are caving. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.